So when we were doing the Big Four, which was this really cool moment in our genre, when Metallica had reached out to Slayer, Megadeth, and Anthrax to combine all four of us together to do these big stadium shows. While we were doing them, our bass amp manufacturer, Harkey Amplifiers, had come to us about Frank and I doing some dual bass clinics, which is very unusual because usually drummers, guitar players do a lot of the clinics. Bass players?
Nobody likes us. That's the way you go.
Jazz bass players maybe,
yeah,
but
jazz.
I know for me, I really needed to, not only just be able to like play, the song, the part, but kind of dig into it, like explain, what am I doing here? What is that? How did that come to pass? And I think probably for Frank and I, the bass is such a integral part of Anthrax and Megadeth that, it's a piece of the fabric of the sound of our groups. Look, obviously.
I think I'm watching MTV right now.
Yeah. Music news. That's a song I remember when we were on, before we even recorded the album, we were out doing a little warm-up tour, about a 3-week tour, and it was kind of the pre-production for the P-Cells, but it was a buying album for Megadeth. But I remember when we started playing that song, because it started with a kick drum, right? And something happens in the room organically, very caveman, when there's a kick drum, right? You don't even have to know or like the song.
You have to get into it.
Sure. This kind of thing. And then I tried to... And people started listening, kind of like that open mic thing. And all of a sudden it's... And all of a sudden you realize like every head in the room was... And it was like, we got something here.
I thought it was a groove. It wasn't metal. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a metal riff,
right? But
you made it metal. You brought it into your own. I don't think that's a metal riff. That could be a groove, like a funk. You know what I mean? It could be a funk thing or R&B. That could be an R. If you put it just a normal, 4/4 beat, dude.
But you're right. There's kind of a in metal, a lot of it is kind of this machine gun staccato thing. But I think in our group for sure, it's having this kind of sexy
swing thing.
Swing to it. It's cool, and a lot of it does go back to Dave Mustaine has always referenced that he grew up with 3 sisters who all listened to Motown, and Motown. Some of the greatest bass playing ever.
That's all I gotta say. Period.
Yeah. So it's cool that in metal we get to do these things and have things that take go into some other facets besides just kind of always the staccato machine gun.
See, what I like about that riff, I think it's Charlie's riff. A lot of our shows we start with that. Mm-hmm. You start with the guitar, and when the bass comes out, you hear the eruption. You hear the eruption from the audience. It's payback.
That's the signature lighter in the air moment.
It's the feeling that we're all looking for when we were young, right? Yeah. We hear that. It's like, great job, whatever. It's the band, it's what we want. So I always love playing that. And you can play that, we play all these songs a zillion times in our life, right? It's a different audience every night. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole point. It's their show. And when they play it, they get to enjoy it at that moment. I'll play it a zillion more times as long as you give me that kind of reaction, right? That's what it's about. Sure. That's honest.
It's interesting in your band because you need that real mid-range tone that you have. Yeah. Whereas in our band, those Marshalls sit right there in the middle of the guitar tone. Right. So I got to get down below those into the kick drum and get up above it, kind of where the percussion of the kick drum beater hits the skin, right? But it's interesting. I've always thought about that, the difference between our two bands, because me being a pick guy and playing like that, and then you being able to be the finger guy, but your tone is very mid-range, and that makes sense. It sits up above. Exactly. It sits up above the where the kick drums are, and it gets out of the way of where Scott cuts a pretty wide. Takes up a lot of bandwidth with the guitar tone.
My tone is through my fingers because you can control what you need, how to get through it. Mm-hmm. It pretty much is that. You get a set up tone, but if I need to cut a little more, I'll just put a little more pressure in it. In the playing, the actual playing. And somehow it works. I don't ask about it.
It's interesting. Fieldy from Korn had a great quote that he said. He said, "Your signature sound is in the hand you sign your signature with," which generally is the hand that you pluck and pick with. So, growing up, I spent so much time focusing on all the notes over here, and then probably around the time that our bands formed, suddenly our signature sound of our bands you know, you and Scott Ian, me and Dave Mustaine, the tone is really, it's right here in how we play, which makes sense to what you just said.
It's so funny. That's just the way, and you know, it was kind of handed to us. We had no choice because it was there already.
Yeah.
And you just had to put it out there, I think. You know, that's the way it works. It's funny how it works like that.
Play a lick, would you?
Well, like I was talking about before, I mean, just to cut through, you're in the studio's a different animal. Completely, you have to bring everything back. You can't be Mr. Wild Man on stage and all that. And I just put it, same thing as caught in a mosh, right? In the studio, the producer, whoever that may be, will be in the studio. I remember, I think it was it Eddie Kramer? It was Eddie Kramer watching me. And, you know, I play with my fingers, so it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Usually, that might sound steady to you. When it gets under the microscope, it's not so steady. And he'll call you on it. And you'll have to do that. And back in those days, there's no Pro Tools.
Yeah, right.
So it's all on tape, so you have to keep redoing it again and again. Repetition. Ugly stuff.
And it's interesting, that's why I started using a pick. I mean, the Megadeth music in the very beginning was much slower, and it was really kind of... song that's Looking Down the Cross that had a tentative title of Speak No Evil. And it was very slow and just really kind of... right? And it was very kind of just groovy. And I could play it with my fingers, but then as the tempo sped up, I could pick up all the nuances of the guitar parts as well as be able to kind of... I could kind of ride and kind of groove these, you know, slinky bass lines.
And that click sounds great too.
It does.
I just think it's a percussion.
And it's a big part of it is the muting, you know. So I do similar to what Scott Ian does in your band and what Dave does in our band, you know, to be able to replicate the muting. Because I see people like come and go, hey dude, I want to play Symphony of Destruction for you. And they'll play with their fingers. Technically, it's the right notes, it's the right phrase, it's all the right stuff, but it's not the right phrase. It's the right notes in the right meter, but it's not. There's the phrase, right? And that's what really makes music. Yeah.
There's always something. There was something in the second record, the song "Lone Justice" from Spreading the Disease. My first Anthrax record, I played on the EP. This is my first record. I was so scared in the studio. And I really remember this one riff that was really bothering me. It was the starting of the song. It's called Lone Justice. And I started with my fingers. I didn't like the way it sounded with my fingers. I didn't think it sounded heavy enough. I thought it was taking away from the song. And for me to give up the fingers, it's pretty big time. I rarely give up the fingers. But for the better of the song, maybe I was looking ahead. I just tried the pick, and I just thought it sounded. You could hear the staccato. It's right exactly where you needed. And then the riff came in with the guitars, and it just brought it up to a whole new level. But I think that started it. I thought that was very important.
But there's a lot of other ones, like you know, there's a lot of stuff on Rust in Peace. You know, Poison Was the Cure. Very dynamic, you know, using, you know, like, you know, major thirds, you know, for the chording. And so I think for me, you know, whether you're slapping and popping, you're using a pick, using your fingers, you really, as a real musical approach to it, is what is the right thing to use in that particular moment? Just like you said, on that recording, it's, you know, it required me to play with a pick. Today on acoustic radio required me to set the pick down and play with my fingers. So really being aware of what's going on around and listening. I had my band teacher in high school would always say, you know, stop making everything sound like Led Zeppelin. Start to learn to listen to what's going on around you.
It's a great word, listen.
Yeah,
and
listen.
That's the word, listen. Because it'll tell you if you listen. You just have to open your ears. Believe me, it's a bit of ego in there too. To suppress that. And you have to say, wait, maybe this is better for the song. Swallow the pride, get rid of the bullshit. And really just get to the gist of the song. That's what it's about.
remember it was the night before we played Nebworth in London. Frank and I were doing a Harkey bass clinic. And I said to him, I said, we should really just write some backing tracks that we have, because he's playing a couple Anthrax tunes, I'm jamming a couple Megadeth tunes, and it's fine. The fans like that.
But to mix it up, though.
Have something a little more kind of dynamic, a little more maybe even interactive between the two of us, just where we could solo. Bit, But it's funny because we started with acoustic guitars. We didn't have any electric guitars. We just sat and started pinging some ideas back and forth to each other.
You would think thrash guys would just pick up these heavy guitars and heavy loud sounds and stuff. We couldn't even find a bass. I couldn't find a bass in your house. I don't know how that happens.
We're
You're
all
a bass player.
on tour. Yeah, exactly.
It was pretty,
I have a piano and some acoustic guitars.
It actually really worked out nicely. So it was so easy to just bounce back and forth that day. We were on the couch just chilling. I love the vibe that had. It all started everything right there.
Booze and Cigarettes. I think it was just, you could tell, it was like, this is just a magical song. It's got a great lyric. And I think it identified our roles as you as the singer, guitar player, and me as the bass player. Just kind of like, quite honestly, well, part of me is emulating Gene Simmons playing like Firehouse or something, right? But kind of this slinky, groovy thing under, because Frank's just kind of hanging chords,
and
right?
I'm the steady guy underneath, so it makes sense.
Cigarettes.
That's cool. I never knew he did that.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably watched it in the studio, but I was probably freaked out because I get into bass. I love bass players. I just like watching how their minds work, because everybody's different. Everybody's got their own thing.
Yeah.
And I really love to see, because I want to learn from that. I learn from everybody. I think we all do.
It's a real treat in this band to do that, because when you're playing thrash metal and our riffs, they're there's no room to be doing, this kind of, sort of free-form thing. But in what we do here, and especially these songs that Frank brings in with these nice big open chords, there's room for the bass to move. And my theory is that when the guitars are busy, this bass has to get simple, but when the guitars get simple, the bass can get busy. And so there's a perfect example of that theory that I use for constructing a bass line.
And in A&A, Dave does a good job of that. You do, and I have to say, if you listen to the songs, like I always worry about the song, the melody on top, but I also have confidence that he's going to come in with something. So I really don't, because I want to leave it open. It's almost like an experiment. I wonder what he's going to come up with for this bass line, because I don't want to think bass. It's weird,
Yeah.
I don't want to think bass for this project. I think it's interesting to see what your vibe is, and that brings the whole thing to another level. I do. That's the way I love it. It's fun.